Roland, why study ancient Galilee?
Oh, that's easy to answer because it gives you the opportunity to visit modern-day Galilee, which is just a lovely place. So I love to be in Galilee. So every excuse I have to study Galilee and use Galilee as part of my teaching and research is a very welcome excuse to go to Israel and visit Galilee.
Right. Okay. Well, I too would like going to Israel, and I too like visiting places. But is there any other reasons?
Yes, of course, there are a lot of good reasons to study Galilee. And actually, if one looks up the New Testament book market or the Jesus book market, half of the title in the meantime will have Galilee somewhere in the title, like Jesus and Galilee, or the Galilean Jesus, or Jesus from Galilee, and so on. So Galilee research became intertwined with Jesus research, and the reason is, I think, that from the 19th century, when this quest for the historical Jesus started off properly, and the scholars in the midst of the 19th century at the latest, I would say, realized that you can't understand Jesus properly without understanding the Jewish world of the first century. Interest in the historical surrounding and the historical context of Jesus became increasingly important for New Testament scholarship and especially Jesus scholarship. And then, of course, half of the Gospels are located, or the stories in the Gospel are located in Galilee. And so naturally, you look for Galilee to find the historical context for the historical Jesus. And if we look closer, we actually see that the interest in Galilee, or the biblical places, started at the latest in the 4th century, when the first travelers from all around the Roman Empire came to Israel to see the places and to visit the places where these stories reported in the Old and the New Testament took place. And we have then with Jerome and others the first church fathers who actually made dictionaries of the place names and the places mentioned in the Bible and the historical knowledge available for their time. And so even if this was not concentrated of Galilee, but we still have from this period onwards a steady flow of information from travelers, pilgrims, and then starting with the 18th century researchers and explorers telling us about Galilee. And I think this is one of the most important sources for our historical understanding, because geography and topography does not change easily. So the climate, the distances, the atmosphere of a place keeps over time, and that's one of the reasons why Galilee is so important.
One of the interesting things in Galilee research, you mentioned the church fathers, people like Eusebius and Jerome, and you could follow that all the way down to people who produced maps of Galilee in the 20th century, trying to discover the topography, where places are. For instance, the famous debates is, where is Cana? But that's one dimension of Galilee research, but there's an interesting dimension I see in the last 20 years, and that is getting involved in the economy of Galilee, the worry, the concerns about what were social conditions like in Galilee. Would you like to talk about that interest in the economy and the peasantry in Galilee?
It's in a way two questions. The one is the economical question, which is highly important. And there we have more or less two schools. The one who want to see Jesus as the champion of the poor, they make actually Galilee in a poverty house, exploited first by the Herodians, then by the Romans, and the people lived kind of depressed lives. And so Jesus was a kind of social reformer, helping them out of their misery and poverty, which I think is a scholarly myth and has nothing to do with reality. Because the archaeological work, which started in Galilee in the second half of the 20th century and is an ongoing project which produces interesting and fascinating results, makes very clear that Galilee during the 1st century was no poorhouse at all, but the people lived in stable conditions. There was enough money available for building houses, for sometimes even ornamenting the houses. Wall paintings are available not just in Sepphoris and Tiberias, the 2 cities, but also in smaller villages like Gamla or Jotapata. So Galilee was a functioning society, and until today Galilee is a fruitful place. So there are agriculture, fishing available, and so I would say this is an ideological element to see Galilee as a poorhouse and Jesus as a champion of the poor. I sometimes challenge my colleagues and say, tell me about one poor person in the New Testament or in the Gospels, and tell me one poor person in the sense of materially poor Jesus actually helps or is concerned with. But that's the one point. The other element, which started already in the 19th century and I think is even stronger in the background of Galilee research, is that people who want to put Jesus in a certain corner within Judaism find this corner in Galilee and create a special form of Judaism which they can locate in Galilee as different from Jerusalem. And so in the 19th century it was, on the one hand, the interest in finding, we have this famous quote, Galilee of the Gentiles. So this idea that in Galilee are not just Jews, but foreign people as well. And this was used in different ways to say, okay, Jesus was more open for non-Jews, more open to, so less nationalistic than, let's say, the Jerusalemites or the Judeans. And this was then developed even further, especially by some Nazi theologians, but again with roots in the 19th century, saying, yes, we even know of Aryans and all kind of non-Jewish people living there, so Jesus might have non-Jewish blood, which then in the end made him actually into an Aryan. And Galilee was used for this kind of ideological background. And even in modern day Jesus research, this is a strong element. If you want to say Jesus is not typically Jewish, then you say, look, Galilee is totally different. And again, I think there is more ideology behind than actually history, because again, from archaeological findings, we can be fairly sure that Galilee from around 100 BCE to about 100 CE was clearly dominated by Jewish culture, and there was no visible pagan influence within central Galilee. It was on the border, so in the coastal area clearly, and then on what is nowadays Jordan and Syria in the area of the Decapolis, but not in Galilee itself.
You began by giving us the very good reason that studying Galilee gives you an excuse to go off and visit modern Galilee. And of course, as you point out, pilgrims and scholars have been going to Galilee for at least 1800 years. The interesting thing is that when most people go to Galilee, say as a pilgrim stroke tourist stroke interest in the Bible, they'll be shown, this is where this happened, this is where this happened, this is where the other thing happened. And the impression is given that we know a great deal. But actually, our knowledge of Galilee is something that has really mushroomed in only the last few years. And I suspect that what we know about Galilee now is somewhat less than we will know in a few years' time. That this is a creative area of research.
This is true. There's a lot of work going on in Galilee all the time, and our findings help us to refine the picture more and more. But I would say there are no real surprises coming up in the last year. So perhaps the most interesting finds is that there are now more finds available which are actually from the 1st and 2nd century. So this is something exciting, because so far most of the findings were actually a little bit later. So the famous synagogues which you can visit in Galilee nowadays are from the 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th century, and not actually from the 1st century. And now with places like Magdala and others, there are suddenly more sites from the 1st century, not necessarily mentioned in the New Testament, but helpful in giving us insights in the life of people in the 1st century. And this is fascinating. And also fascinating is that there emerges also something like artistic tradition now suddenly in Galilee. So we always construe Judaism as a religion without images, without art. But this image is the one which changes most dramatically at the moment. So first we found art in connection with the Herodian sites, and we thought, okay, Herod, this kind of half-Jew, he brought in all kind of foreign ideas and was less strict with regard to images. But the synagogue from Magdala, which I mentioned, also produced a kind of stone which was ornamented, and nearby synagogue in Khirbet Hammam produced a mosaic floor which might be dated to the 3rd century, which then would be one of the first mosaic floors, and there we have biblical scenes on the floor. So there, I think this would be the most interesting element in future research, to see how art is part of the Jewish heritage in Galilee, and how Jewish art and Christian art influenced each other and conflicted with each other in this period.
Roland, thank you very much.